Senator Aument and Representative Smith-Wade-L, and they will be here to discuss early childhood education with you.
Well, good evening. It is a privilege for me to be here with you and Representative Izzy. First of all, let me just say how thrilled I am with the mission of Bravery Angels. It's so critical today in the political environment that we're in that we are able to engage in a civil and respectful manner, that we can have substantive policy disagreements, and we can disagree, and that we can disagree well, and we can disagree productively. Certainly one of the aspects of our current environment that concerns me is the politics, quite frankly, of contempt. And that is that, we can disagree on the issues, but that doesn't mean that we view each other with hatred, with contempt, just because we have different life experiences, we have a different worldview, we have a different perspective on the issues. And so I'm just pleased with the mission, and I'm pleased to be here and to elevate conversation around early childhood. So first of all, I wanted to state that, and secondly, I want to thank all of you for being here, for your engagement, for the work that you're doing, and I look forward to hearing from you on issues that are important to you and issues that you believe that the General Assembly ought to prioritize. I have a few notes here, and we'll get through this in the discussion. Sometimes the staff gives me prepared comments. They do that not so that I have prepared comments, but so that I stick to the time. That's why they time out for me what I should highlight. And rather than going through the list of all the areas where the legislature invested in last year's budget and the budget this year, one issue that I do want to elevate that I think is critically important, I think early childhood and the work that you're doing in the field is so critically important too, and that is literacy. And ensuring that our young people are entering kindergarten fully prepared, academically prepared to learn to read by grade 3. We know it is critically important. So the work that you are doing in the field is vital to that effort. I am very concerned, not just in Pennsylvania, but when you look across the country, the trend with respect to 3rd and 8th grade reading proficiency. It is alarming. And so I've been working in a bipartisan way. There's legislation in the House of Representatives sponsored by my friend Jason Ortizai, a new colleague of Representative Izzy, Justin Fleming, who has legislation in the House. I've co-sponsored legislation with my friend and colleague across the aisle, Anthony Williams, that will ensure we're doing a couple of things. That we're utilizing best practices, evidence-based instruction practices, the science of reading in the classroom, that we are doing screening often, early, and that we are identifying young people who are having difficulty reading early, and that we're intervening and providing them with the supports that they need. And we're providing educators, the classroom teachers, with the support and the resources that they need. I think it's a critically important effort. Other states have seen tremendous success. Mississippi, phenomenal success by taking those steps. But critical, and Mississippi is also a case to this point, critical to that effort is early childhood education and making sure that our young people have access to high quality pre-K and are entering kindergarten fully prepared to learn and are proficient in reading by grade 3. So look forward to the conversation tonight. Thank you so much for your work and look forward to your feedback.
Thank you, Senator Aument. And I just want to echo the Senator's thanks for having us. I actually want to thank you again, Senator Aument. It's been one of the rare pleasures to sort of discover the places where we can work together across the aisle. And absolutely, early childhood education is one of them. My experience, my short time in the House, there is a lot of we interact very differently on camera or in front of the chamber than we do in the hallways. Those conversations are very different. But one of the places I think where we, in all four caucuses, if you will, Democrats and Republicans in both the upper and lower house, speak with a rare unanimity is the necessity of investing in our children and investing in them early. As we discuss education, I think one of the great missed marks is how much of the public dialogue around education is sort of locked into this post-secondary space. Now, education is an equalizer at all age levels. There's some fantastic work going on in the school districts across the county in the IU13 with adult learners, but absolutely we know, the math bears it out over and over again, that the best time to invest in education is as early in a person's life as possible. And you're looking at sometimes 1,000% return on investments in terms of savings and education costs later down the line, but sort of things that you don't even think about. Labor force participation rate, crime rates in a given community, all of these things are impacted by our investment in early childhood education. And some of that's just the number. For me, I think a thing that we can almost never avoid talking about is that our budgets are a moral document and that we are taking money from our people and our businesses, and we have an obligation to spend it in the best way possible. We may have disagreements on what that is, but that's the obligation. But some of it, I think, comes to how we structure access. I'll tell you something that I've received multiple overtures from the school district of Lancaster about how we manage the top of the income scale, for subsidized childcare and early education opportunities, where they may find that they actually have more slots. I know this is almost sacrilege to say, and that they struggle to fill all of their slots within the income brackets that they have. But as is with any line that the government draws in the sand, there are many folks $50 above the income threshold, $500 above the income threshold, which is, it's a dollar a paycheck, whatever, whose kids very much need the early childhood education investment, but aren't able to receive it because of $50, $100, $500 a year, and some of that stuff just doesn't make sense. But there's also bipartisan legislation in the General Assembly to that effect, and I think that's Representative Nelson, Ed Nelson. There's also a Napoleon Nelson, and Chairman Steve Kinsey of the House Human Services Committee working on that legislation. So a thing that I hope to benefit from, I think that we can both benefit from, is hearing what perspectives you all have as neighbors, as community members, as professionals in the field, things that we can do other than just making the number bigger, because I think that message has already been sent. What can we do technically to support the work, to expand access, and take ourselves out of this thing where we are chasing, frankly, social justice, economic justice, and equity at the post-secondary level, which I would argue is 15 to 16 years too late when we talk about the workforce, the lifetime outcomes of our folks. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
All right. Sounds great. And may I thank both of them for being amazingly on time with their remarks.
Somebody write the date down.
So we are now going to move into the topics that we had, and the first topic that we are going to look at is family engagement. We had two groups looking at that. So just as a reminder for everyone, because we are on Facebook Live, we are going to be using microphones. And so we will come over to this group, and I will ask for your one sentence, and then we will come over to your group, and I will ask for your one sentence, and then it's a free-for-all for 9 minutes, and we'll just see where this goes. So I will offer our guests an opportunity to ask questions, or I know that each group came up with some additional ideas that they wanted to make sure to share, so we'll see where this goes. After family engagement, we will take a look at the economic impact, and then our third group will be taking a look at access. So let me come over here, and who is going to be your spokesperson? So your one sentence is...
It was easy to agree. We support investment in early childhood education, but it requires parental involvement and support. Financial shared responsibility outside of the normal property tax, and an approved legislative plan for the crisis.
Okay, I'm holding the microphone, so I'm going to go. Let's talk. We're on family engagement, yes?
Yes, we're on family engagement.
So I used to work at the Community Action Partnership, where I wrote grants for, among other programs, a program called Parents as Teachers. How can we as legislators, I think, resisting the urge to prescribe the nature and structure of family relationships, support parents as their children's first educators? If you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
This is kind of simple, but encouraging parents to read to their children and making books central to their lives and everything about them. We get books into their hands first, and not so quick to go to a cell phone or a screen or a tablet. I think that builds a pretty important foundation right off the bat. 2-year-olds being read to. Who knew?
Erica?
So, thank you. One of the things we did, I'm former school superintendent at Eastern Lancaster County School District, so we had this challenge, and it was right in our face. Our kindergarten readiness scores were as low as any in the county. The superintendents about 10 years ago agreed to a standard assessment so that we could compare to one another. And because of the geographic diversity that we had, because of how spread out we were, it was very difficult for our families to find daycare. So what we did is we provided the benchmarks that students needed to have going into kindergarten. And we said to parents, here's where we need you to get your kids to. And by the way, here are some kits. We purchased manipulatives and books and those kinds of things, and we gave them to the parents. But we didn't prescribe, Izzy, how to do it. We didn't get into the culture, because culture was a part of the equation in Garden Spot. But we gave them the materials, and we gave them the targets.
Bob, at what point, and I remember you and I having conversations about kindergarten readiness, and at that point when you were superintendent there, your focus on ensuring that more students in Lanco had access and the ability to attend a high-quality pre-K program. At what point did you begin those conversations with families? How early were you engaging with families? And my follow-up to that is, and there's a reason for my follow-up, the follow-up to that is the families that began to engage with you at that point, did you see that engagement with that family continue after the child entered the year K through 12 system? Did you see improved outcomes in terms of family engagement because you were engaging with those families early?
That is a great question. I can in a vignette say yes, but we should have collected data on that, Ryan. That would have been a really good data point to have. In terms of our engagement, we actually were putting postcards everywhere babies were born in the county. We actually introduced ourselves in the birthing centers at Ephrata and General Hospital and wherever babies were born, saying 2 years from now, please contact us, and here's how to do it.
And the reason I asked the second question is one of the other issues I talked about literacy in my opening comments, the concerns that I have over third grade reading attainment. The other concern that I have, and I don't know, I don't have the answer to this, and there probably isn't a prescription to come from the legislature, but one of the other concerns I have is around truancy. And since COVID, and we've not seen many young people return to school. We don't know where they are. This is a national trend. It's certainly an issue in Pennsylvania, and I would be interested in seeing some survey data with districts across Lancaster County and certainly across Pennsylvania to try to get a feel for why many students aren't in school, why the truancy rates are so high. Are kids safe? Are they experiencing homelessness? What are the other reasons that they are not in school? And so I think to go back to the original point around parental and family engagement, I think it's so critical in the pre-K the pre-K years, but also then to figure out how do we maintain that engagement with families throughout their experience in the K through 12 system.
We have another comment over here.
Yeah, kind of along the lines of what this gentleman over here was mentioning was finding a way to educate parents of infants through 5-year-olds on what to expect from quality early childhood education, and possibly doing something like a postcard or something through the pediatrician's office. It shares with them, this is what you should look for when you're looking at early childhood education providers. Is here's what you should look for, and hopefully helping the parents to raise the standard of early childhood education providers so their kids are benefiting from it.
I'll say this incredibly brief thing. We can go over here. I think a thing that is apparent to me, especially in Lancaster City, but throughout the county, many of our childcare centers where folks send their kids at an early age, they're in people's homes, either converted homes or still their homes. And there are, of course, there's an effort at the city, an effort at LGH, but also a very tangible thing that we can do seems to me to be making sure that we're assessing and managing the quality of those environments, especially as regards, for example, lead poisoning. Yeah. Pennsylvania has a very old housing stock. I'm very proud of what we've done at the city, but that seems like a place we can easily redouble some efforts.
Hi, thanks so much to both of you for your time. Jesse Waters with Elizabethtown College, and I just want to reinforce something that is it Tom? That there's an interesting phenomenon that's happened in our country when we started looking at issues of addiction and recovery as social issues rather than criminal issues, and we managed to speak to that population, I think, much more adeptly in terms of their needs. If we started in our state Congress having the rhetorical approach that education is health, and the closer we bring those two words together in the rhetoric that you gentlemen use among your colleagues, then we start potentially inculcating the idea of our families that educating your children makes them healthy. And if that sort of line of reasoning becomes part of your rhetorical conversation, there's the opportunity for both a political, a social, and a communal trickle down of that sort of attitude, which could truly be landscape changing.
All right, we have already almost time's up. Those 10 minutes go fast. So I've told each of the groups who were talking about this that I was going to give them one more statement of what else it is that they might want to say.
Yeah, our discussion was about in-home daycares, and it was brought up about the program that used to be in place called SAIL, which was a mobile support system to go out to these in-home childcare. I keep mixing all these words, but childcare, early childhood education, and helping them to get their standards up. And the funding dissolved from that, and it went away. We need that funding to stay and be persistent and expand because that is in a very effective way of bringing everybody up. And that's what our main focus was, that we were talking about how we need to bring everybody up to a much higher standard to start with.
I don't know if you have any questions as I make my way over here, but what else would this group like to share before we move on to the next topic?
Okay, so I was a pre-K accounts teacher in Lancaster, but I now teach kindergarten in Harrisburg City. I think the main thing, especially with family engagement, is getting parents more involved, and that one of the things that needs to happen is getting parents the programs. Like, a lot of parents don't know how good quality education that they need to have for kids to go into kindergarten, or what kids need to know for going into kindergarten. And as I taught preschool and pre-K counts, I showed them a checklist that United Way had printed out, and we handed those things to parents. That way they knew what their kid needed to know going into kindergarten, such as knowing at least 10 letters, whether it's uppercase or lowercase, knowing how to count from 1 to 10, knowing their colors and their shapes, things like that. Basic things that inner city education, we can do better at teaching that. That way they're already set, because as we all know, that a lot of times parents who are in the inner cities, they don't have the means to get quality education. So their kids are already starting low. Whereas then as a kindergarten teacher, I have to get them up to speed and then getting them ready for first grade. So it's just getting more parents involved, but having those programs to teach parents what quality education is, what their kids need to know, and things like that. So.
All right, we could probably spend the next 30 minutes talking just about that, right? But we do need to move on, and we're going to go on to our second topic, and that is the economic impact. So let me share it with this group. See what I'm doing?
All right. So our sentence was investment in early childhood education right now creates a society that is both self-sustaining and it limits the need for continuous economic support.
Everyone went, Let me come back to this group.
We thought our sentence would be an incredibly long run-on sentence, but because there are three really smart people here, we got it to 10 words. Invest now with equitable options for everyone, or pay later.
Questions, or would sold? Questions or comments, or would you like to just go back to the groups?
I'll just make, if I could, make a quick comment on a limitation that has been a frustration of mine over the 12, 13 years I've been in Harrisburg now with our budget process. And that is, I don't believe that we have, and our budget process does not allow really for us to have that critical conversation. And that is, if we don't invest here now, what are the economic consequences of that down the road? What is the return on investment with some of the spending decisions and frankly some of the revenue tax decisions that we make? And to think of that more long term. Our budget process doesn't allow for that. I have tried over the years to elevate a conversation around a biannual or 2-year budget to try to get to that, some more long-range thinking, and also, and I think, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues, I think there are two fears that I've heard around the biannual budget, the 2-year budget. One is that many states that have a 2-year biennial budget also have part-time legislatures. And I think there's some concern that this would be a step in that direction. There may or may not be merits to a part-time legislature. I actually, the time that I've been there, I think there is some value to having a full-time working legislature. Secondly, there's some concern that the legislature has a due diligence annual requirement. But I think a 2-year biennial budget would allow for us to make adjustments through supplemental appropriations, through changes throughout a calendar or a fiscal year. And so I think there are ways to address both of those concerns. But I think a 2-year biennial budget would allow us to do more long-range thinking, have a more thorough analysis of that return on investment. What is the actual economic impact of the spending choices we're making, as well as tax revenue changes that we may make over a longer period of time. Also, by the way, allow those of you who depend on state dollars, human service agencies, social service agencies, schools, to be able to better predict what your revenue picture is going to look like over a 2-year period rather than on an annual basis. But it would also, rather than us seemingly every year having this budget fight that occupies so much of our time, allow us to spend more time on doing that type of analysis, to do the oversight that we also have a responsibility to do. So I absolutely agree with you. I think we have made decisions, certainly throughout my time in the General Assembly, where we've tried to pinch a penny here, save a dollar here, but we end up spending more in our criminal justice system, in our social service agencies, wherever it may be down the line, because maybe we tried to cut a corner here. And I think you're spot on. I think it's something we have to be more thoughtful. I think our process doesn't allow for it, and I think we have to reform the process.
I mean, I think your sentence largely has a period on it. I think the only thing that I'd add to the 2-year budget piece, just to be blunt about how the sausage was made, there'd be less budgeting in election years, and I think we'd end up with a better budget that way, frankly.
Other thoughts, and I hear more, Other thoughts from the groups that were talking about the economic impact, and I'm saying, yeah, make sure you say this, so make sure you say that.
Actually, we have a couple here. So we thought that one of the really important things too was for the programs to be trauma informed. That there's so much that kids are going through, and if we can deal with those issues and solve some of them early, then they don't fester. Maybe we should get here just something to think about for legislators. Our superintendent suggested that the fair funding formula be instituted for all of pre-K. As a way to maybe find dollars. Is that an accurate assessment of what you're talking about, Bob?
Fully implemented for just pre-K, sort of as a carve out. Because what is the implementation is, what is it, Senator? 20 years till it's fully in place. Because equity was an issue that we talked about too, and the fair funding formula is much more fair for those of you who don't know about it for schools, much more fair than it was. And you could carve out pre-K if you were going to fund something and use funding formula completely and 100% implementation.
Should I say one more? Or should we
Sure.
And then we just also talked about how many barriers there are for early childhood education, and that if we could alleviate barriers, most especially poverty, is there some way that we could, I know, huge societal issues, but if we could deal with those issues, do kids get off to a better start and have a more equitable opportunity for success later on?
I'm going to jump in here and say I don't know whether that's the chicken or the egg, but it's one of them. And investing in, thank you, but investing as much as possible in early childhood education is probably one of the more effective ways that we have to actually address that, just in terms of folks' lifetime earnings. Like, I'm a big believer in investing in education, in making investments, and frankly some taxation changes to lower the cost of housing, because I think that's where most things start and end. But you talk about a generational investment. early childhood ed is it. And I gotta say, Bob, that's actually a pretty strong suggestion. I think, maybe not everybody agrees with me, we probably owe public ed in the Commonwealth about $4.6 billion. But, and I know that's a ways out, but that sounds like a good common sense place to advance more equity and funding and as to how we support educating our young people. I'm going to hand this back to Ryan just so I don't talk so much.
And I think the other issue that you could be very helpful to us to think through is how do we define success? So I agree that we need to enhance the investment that we're making and that there absolutely will be long-term health and economic benefit to young people if they in fact have access to high-quality pre-K and enter kindergarten ready and are proficient in reading by grade 3. We know the impact that has on their long-term success. As we think through, and I know my colleagues well, certainly in my caucus, that if we are talking about a significant investment along what we're suggesting here, is the question that is going to come up is, okay, what is success? How do we define success? How do we know that investment has had the impact that we believe it will be? And I have been a part over the 12 years of that accountability movement in the K through 12 system, which put a heavy emphasis on standardized assessment with respect to how we measure school performance, how we measure educator performance, and appropriately we have dialed that back because we've seen negative consequences of too much emphasis on standardized assessment. So I think that's an issue where you can be helpful in helping us think through, if we're to make a significant investment, if we're successful in continuing to make a significant investment, what is success? How do we define it? How do we measure it?
And we are going to allow this group to have the last word in sharing one other thing with each of you.
Yeah, two things that we kind of talked about is we're both directors in private childcare facilities, so we see it all. But from a systems perspective, from the government, is having our agencies under Department of Human Services and then having Department of Ed have all of public education. It is frustrating because Department of Ed gets tons of funding and child care centers and Department of Human Services gets zero government funding. No, not zero, but consistent no funding. So, and just with regulations and everything, there is a lot of frustration in that separation of how that is broken down. So I know that's a big problem, but it just wanted to say it. And then the other thing we just wanted to say out loud is staffing issues. And you can provide and have all the funding ready to go, but if you don't have human resources to provide those programs and services at a decent wage, at a respectable wage, and at an honored wage, you're not going to have people to educate the children. So any funding that comes through to early childhood, whether it's through Department of Ed or Department of Human Services, really we feel just needs to have a focus on human resources and changing the culture of staffing in early childhood.
Yep.
I'm hearing a lot of amens, right? And
Well, I'm just going to jump in and say this. Really top to bottom at every age range in education. Just that when I was in high school as a young man, I couldn't go to the movie theater or the pool or the mall without somebody trying to recruit me to join the armed services. And that's fine, and that's all well and good. There's no similar full court press to recruit educators at every level, in every subject, in every area. And I think that is a place where, just in economies of scale, government can be a force for good. Because again, when I went to the mall, they would say, this is a job that can transform your life. We're going to help fund your education because we know that's going to pay off for our Commonwealth and our country. And we could probably do a similar thing for educators and in particular early educators.
All right, and again, we could spend so much more time on each of these topics, but I will remind everyone that the points that you did pull together in that first hour will be shared with our legislators. So our last group is talking about access.
Okay. We would ask the legislators that in recognition of the fundamental importance of early childhood education, that subsidies be provided that are affordable to parents, for example, less than 10% of household income, and sufficient for early childhood educators to pay staff a living wage.
So that certainly does piggyback off the earlier conversation. Would either of you like to say anything else, or are there any other points that haven't been covered that this group would like to also share? I'll turn it over.
Just very quickly, I'm certainly aware that the staffing shortage and the challenges with paying high-quality staff, recruiting and the retention of staff in this space is a significant hurdle, is a significant barrier. Two of my colleagues in the Senate, and I'm doing this from memory, I don't have all the details, I know have sponsored legislation to bring stakeholders, to form a commission to bring stakeholders to the table to be part of a conversation as to how we can craft a public policy agenda, what would have the most meaningful impact. Obviously, the investment's critical, we know that, but how to direct those dollars to ensure that we are recruiting and retaining the best and the brightest to go into education, to stay in education, and particularly in pre-K. I always sort of laugh to myself now every time I suggest a commission, and I've done this a couple of times. When I was first running for the legislature back in 2010, one of my best applause lines was that anytime Harrisburg wants to give you the illusion they're doing something, the perception they're doing something, but really in the end not really do anything and solve a problem, they form a commission or do a study. And it was always a great applause line, and I found myself over the years advocating for studies and commissions at various points. And part of the reason is genuinely, is if if the commission is designed well, you put the right people on it, you bring stakeholders to the table, you have very specific benchmarks that commission is to accomplish and a specific timeline in place that commission is to do its work, and you insist on a bipartisan legislative commission. We've had real success in the General Assembly with that, with really complex issues. The Transportation Funding Commission is a great example of that. The Basic Education Funding Commission is another great example of that, because it brings legislators together to engage with stakeholders who can bring a measure of expertise that we can't bring to the table, our staff really can't bring to the table, and it ensures bipartisan cooperation on the recommendations, which then often leads to an easier path to get something through the legislative process because you already have bipartisan buy-in. So I do think this is an area where I think a well-crafted commission with a specific timeline to do its work so that it's actually reporting a product that can deliver a positive impact soon. The makeup, the stakeholders, the legislative makeup is critical. I think this may be an area where a commission, I think, would be of some benefit. I don't know the bill number. Pat Stefano and Linda Schlegel-Culver in the Senate are the two prime sponsors of that commission on child care, specifically on child care workforce issues.
And I think the thing that I'd suggest is, as we are talking about accountability, oftentimes when we set benchmarks for care professions, we set benchmarks entirely around units of service, less outcomes, more outputs. I think for early ed, a reasonable benchmark to evaluate our contractors, licensees, is that staff satisfaction and retention, because I'm willing to bet if you dug in and did the research, you'd see that there's a strong correlation between staff retention in these professions and outcomes. We already know how important it is for early learners to reduce the number of transitions. And frankly, we also know, kind of with almost any job, it takes you a few years to really get your feet underneath you. And so if we're turning over childcare professionals every year, we don't have the best people doing the work because by definition they haven't had enough training and sort of inculcation in the environment, and we're increasing the number of transitions, separating children from important formative relationships. So, I would advocate for that thing as an accountability benchmark.
Absolutely.
We did have one other comment here at least.
My name is Jim Shank. I would say I very much affirm the idea of doing something, getting something moving pretty quickly. We've many times heard about child care crisis. I am on a board chair. I'm board chair for an early childhood center in Akron. We serve 140 children in a year. We have 180 children on a wait list. We have 13 staff positions that are open for the fall. We're not opening an infant class and a pre-K class simply because we don't have the staff. So, and we're a Star 4 program. So it's a pretty good program. Our director, Bethany, could give you a lot more details, but this feels like crisis to us, and we hear about other centers closing. So my encouragement, there's only a certain amount we can do to run a good organization, work in every aspect we can, but we need some assistance beyond us.
And just, I will use that opportunity to again, perhaps urge or make a point in support of a biannual or 2-year budget. Because again, we spend so much time, so much political capital, even in a good year, where a budget gets done relatively on time, so much time is spent on that process. And when that process breaks down and we're in some state of dysfunction, when you don't have, and I'm not suggesting we're at that place right now, but where leaders aren't talking to each other, it holds up all these other critical issues that we know we have to address. And so I just think from a good government perspective, we need a better budget process. And I'm not suggesting the biannual or the 2-year budget process is the silver bullet. I think it's a piece. I think that a biannual budget, and in the event of a budget impasse where you have a continuity budget that's in place that funds state agencies up to 80-90% of the previous year's budget until budget's agreed to, so that we're not holding schools and social service agencies, human service agencies hostage during a budget impasse. It's morally wrong. And so I think the budget process, improving that process, will allow for the legislature to have more time to focus on these other critical issues. Get these commissions off the ground, get the recommendations made, and start moving a legislative agenda.
We have time for any other thoughts that this group wanted to share.
I did see an impact thing. I don't mean to give you all short.
We have time for one more comment, so.
You can if you, it doesn't matter.
Well, I just wanted to maybe suggest to Representative Aument that the legislation that you talked about in the beginning be scrapped, because out of the 3 points you made, 2 of them were on classrooms and only 1 was on early childhood education. When in fact, if you're going to get a kid to learn by grade 3, as pointed out here, it should be heavy emphasis on early childhood education and less on the classroom. If we get them in the early childhood education realm, we easily get them reading by 3. And this legislation, you said fund sources for teachers, best practices in classrooms. That doesn't involve early childhood education.
No, I think it does. I think early childhood education is a critical component of that. But I also believe, and I think the data from other states around the country that are performing well and making dramatic improvements definitively demonstrates that those three bullets that I mentioned around screening, around evidence-based science of reading, ensuring that we're using the appropriate curriculum that's aligned to evidence is essential, as well as providing supports to educators and that also includes, by the way, our teacher preparation program, so that our teachers who are coming out of our schools of education have been appropriately trained to teach children how to read. So I would suggest we don't scrap one and focus on the other. I think we have to do all.
I'm saying the percentages are off. I think it should be heavier emphasis on early childhood education versus on the kids that are in school.
I think we have to do both, and I think the data, when you see which states are making the most improvement with respect to third grade reading attainment, I think the data bears that out.
All right, and with that, I do need to go up here and wave my hand behind you gentlemen again. So we are up to our closing statements. So Representative Smith-Waddell, if you would like to close us out with a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I will actually endeavor to be as brief as possible. So again, I want to say thank you and to encourage you to use this as a springboard for engagement. We're both in Lancaster County. This is what we look like. So, please share your expertise and your insights with us. I think people often forget your legislator, just some gal, just some dude, and there simply cannot possibly be an expert in every field. But we have, to many of the professionals in the room, we have, I want to say outsourced. We have devolved, if you will. We have, devolved the obligation that we have as a state to care for our youngest citizens to you all. It is a duty we have passed on to you, and as such, we have an obligation to show care not just for your outcomes, but for the workers and professionals who are doing that work. And so the lens that I'm always going to look at this through is this: I need the best teacher, whether it's a parent, it's a classroom environment, it's a childcare environment. I need the best teacher. I need them to be clear-headed. I need them to know what's expected of them. And I need that teacher in every classroom, regardless of zip code, because that's how we're going to do well for our students. And look, I got to tell you, the senator is absolutely right that early literacy is important. Frankly, we have colleagues that I'm not sure can read all the bills. Or maybe just don't. But I say that to emphasize your point that early reading is important. And we're going to support that however we can. Senator?
I don't know what to do with that. First of all, I failed to mention this because I always like to make a Lancaster County connection with some of these issues. The legislative focus and the legislative issue around the science of reading. One district, there's more, but one district I'm very familiar with in Lancaster County that has really put a real emphasis and focus on this. And I'm not sure if anybody here resides in the Donegal School District. But the Donegal School District utilized some of the federal ESSER dollars, some of the federal funding they received, and really focused on third grade reading attainment and taking the steps that we are trying to ensure that districts all across Pennsylvania are also utilizing. Dr. Greg Keel there at Donegal has taken this on. He's a rock star. He's just done a phenomenal job. I've spent a lot of time with them and looking at the data and some of the work they've done there. So I wanted to make that. I'm extremely proud of the work that many of our districts here in Lancaster County are doing, and I sometimes fail to make that local connection. I did want to mention, you mentioned these photos on us. My staff 2 years ago, a staff member came to me and not in a very delicate way, suggested that the previous press photo of me, that it no longer looked like me. And the suggestion was that I had aged in office. And I told Tina that she could have approached that with me in a more delicate manner. So it's a relatively new press photo, because apparently the original one looks like a 33-year-old version of me. But anyway, what I'll close with is just encouraging you to continue the engagement, with your elected officials. Build the relationship. Take time to meet with us regularly. Share your experience in the field. Invite us, if you're at a center, invite us if we can attend, if we can come and read to the students there. We're happy to do that. We love to do that. I love to get out of the office. Building those personal relationships are critical because we're not subject matter experts. And the variety of issues, one thing that I love about this job is the wide variety of issues that I get to deal with on a given day. But the result of that is you become a subject matter expert in a little bit about a lot, but can become a very subject matter expert in very little. So we rely very heavily on staff, but we rely very heavily on folks in the field speaking to us, engaging with us, sharing your experiences with us. So please do that. We are a phone call away, an email away. Both of us, we were talking earlier, are active on social media, maybe too active on social media. So whether it's I can't find a legitimate purpose for Snapchat, but whether it's Instagram, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Threads, email, TikTok, you can find us there. Reach out, or just pick up the phone, give us a call, schedule a meeting in the office. But building those personal relationships with your lawmakers is so critically important. So thank you.
Yes, please, let's give them a big round of applause. And I'd just like to go back to one of the things that I said earlier, is that often, even in contentious issues, we have found through Braver Angels and just in general experience that we really do have more in common than we really believe. And so I hope that what we have done here tonight through this Neighbor to Neighbor Forum, which, as I shared with you, is in Braver Angel circles, is known as a deliberative town hall, is shown that that we really can have these discussions. And I think that, I'm assuming that our guests would agree with me that what Braver Angels has learned by being active actually at our national capital is that most of the representatives and staff are also very tired of the rancor and the disagreement, and look forward to having productive conversations with their citizens. So let's also thank the United Way for their facilities and for helping to organize this. Two just small pieces of business. If you are interested in a little bit more information about Braver Angels, Nita, Melissa, myself, or we have a few other representatives who are here as reporters, are more than happy to share with you that information. And then we would also ask all of the participants, on the table is the sheet that you had, and at the bottom is a fancy QR code. If you could take out your phones and then scan that, not take a picture, but scan that, and then please fill out the evaluation. That would be very helpful for all of us. So once again, thank you to everybody for making this a productive and educational evening. Thank you very much.